És uraim, lassan elkezdenénk ezt a mai rendezvényt. Annyit előjáróban elmondanék, hogy a rendezvény első fele angol nyelven lesz, úgyhogy akinek szüksége van tolmácskészülékre, az itt a bal oldalamon tud szerezni. Ha jók az információim, akkor az 1-es csatornán lehet magyarul, és a 2-es csatornán egyébként angolul hallgatni a rendezvényt, úgyhogy ha ezzel kapcsolatban bármi kérdésük van, akkor jelezzék, különben pedig akkor egy rövid videóval kezdődne a rendezvény, úgyhogy
My name is Milos Hodon, and I'm a board member of the European Liberal Fórum, the official foundation and think tank of the ALDE party. European Liberal Fórum, or ELF, is a member-driven foundation, active all over Europe, not only in the European Union, but also beyond, and creating and implementing events and projects with over 50 member organizations. And all this European Liberal Fórum network is answering the most important questions for the future of Europe from the liberal perspective. And there are so many questions in these difficult times. In today's times of multiple crises, we can see increasing importance granted to the interventionist measures of the state. And interventionism is not something that liberals like the most. Yet, facing consequences of the COVID-19 pandemics and the consequences of the brutal Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine, even self-declared liberal parties, self-declared liberal governments supported new measures, supported new state activities. And it looks like the global polycrisis, with this global polycrisis, everything is changing. Even liberalism. And I believe there is nothing bad about it. There is nothing bad about the fact that liberalism adjusts. It is just very important that when this process happens alongside, we don't forget about questioning it. We don't forget about being critical and asking the most important fundamental questions. So, what makes us different? How do we protect individual freedom? Can interventionism have this long-term goal of protecting, of securing individual freedom? And do we still see the individual as the source of the government and its powers? Such questions like these ones, we ask ourselves every day in Brussels, and I really hope you'll answer these questions yourselves during this Budapest conference. And the conclusions of this event will contribute to the overall debate we are having, and we're trying to inspire from Brussels and trying to engage all our member organizations and partners all around Europe. So thank you very much, Republikon Foundation, for organizing this event in Budapest, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you about the conclusions shortly after it ends. Thank you so much, and have a fruitful discussion in Budapest.
So now officially, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrea Virag. I am Director of Strategy at Republikon Institute. And on behalf of our institute, I would like to welcome all of you and also those who are joining us online today to our event called The State's Role During Current Crises, organized by Republikon Foundation and the European Liberal Fórum. First of all, I want to thank the European Liberal Fórum for supporting our event. I think it for Republikon, since its founding, it's always been important to discuss economics, to discuss economic policies. However, since the COVID crisis, and especially given how the Hungarian government responded to the economic hardships caused by COVID, and also how the government responded to the current crisis and inflation, we felt that it is especially important right now to discuss what the ideal role of the state should be in times like this. At the beginning of the conference, I will give you a short presentation on how Hungarian voters think about state intervention, the state's role in economic policies, and then we are going to have an international panel discussion with our guests. Our original plan was to have a bigger roundtable involving a very valuable partner from Italy and Austria as well. Unfortunately, for personal reasons, after all, they couldn't join us. However, I'm sure that either way we are going to have a very interesting conversation, and we are also going to hear a short video message from our Austrian partner. This section of the conference will be held in English, and then the second part will be a Hungarian debate between Zoltán Pogács and Péter Mihály. So again, thank you all for coming and joining us. And now I'm going to start with my short presentation, and then we are going to proceed to the roundtable discussion. So, as I said, and as I'm sure some of you might know, I'm not an economic expert, I'm a political analyst, so I'm not going to talk about economic policy, I leave that to our experts. What I am going to talk about is how the Hungarian population feels about the state's role in economic policies. The data that I'm going to show you is from 2021. It was a personal survey with 5,000 respondents, an in-person survey. So the data are quite reliable. First of all, it's a very common question in every survey to ask respondents about their ideological self-identification, and two very common questions to ask is where do they put themselves in a left-right and the liberal-conservative scale. Now, unsurprisingly, you'll see that the relative majority of respondents chose the middle value. That's usually like this. It's not a surprise. However, if you see the aggregated numbers, you'll find that the Hungarian population, when it comes to being leftist or rightist, the majority of the Hungarian population will self-identify themselves as right-wing or right-leaning. And when it comes to the liberal-conservative scale, the majority of the Hungarian population is leaning conservative. It's been like this for decades in Hungary. However, we see that in the past decade, the Hungarian population shifted more towards the right and too conservative. Also, it's a very common question to ask respondents to choose between different values, how they feel about different values, what are the closest values to them, and when they can choose between values or ideologies like conservative, liberal, green, socialist, social democrat. Our findings are that almost around half of the population will choose values that belong to the traditional political right, like conservative, like nationalist, like religious, law and order, and so on, which in the current Hungarian situation we can call a rather right-wing, politically right-wing approach. And those ideologies that belong to the traditional left wing, socialist, social democrat, those values are only, or those ideologies are only chosen by less than 10% of the population. So when it comes to self-identification, the Hungarian population is leaning right. However, if we ask respondents, if we ask the Hungarian population about specific issues related to the fabric of our society, to economics, then the picture is quite different, and that's what I'm going to show you in just a few slides. So first, this slide is about taxes and social spending. There was two contradictory statements, let's say. First of which was the state should spend more on welfare even if it means raising taxes, and the other one was taxes should be lowered even if it means less money for welfare. As you can see, more than half of respondents, altogether 54% of respondents, said that they rather have elevated higher taxes if it means more welfare in Hungary, and only 1/4 of the population chose the second statement, that taxes should be lowered even if it means less money for welfare. Now let's see a slide on inequality, income inequality. The state. Is it working? Now, no, okay. So the idea, or the idea that we asked respondents about was only small income differences should be allowed between citizens. And sorry. Now, is it working? Okay, no, okay, it's good. Sorry, but because of the streaming and because of the translation, it's very important that I. I can try. Yeah, sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't. I can try.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ez az. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2.
More details now to have time for the discussion. Now it's okay. So we're back. Sorry, and thank you for your patience. So this data, only small income differences should be allowed between citizens. As you see, only 11% of respondents disagreed with that statement, while roughly 2/3 of the population agrees that there shouldn't be big income differences between citizens. Now, excessive wealth should be taxed. Only 6% rejected this idea, while almost 80% of the population agreed or strongly agreed that there should be a tax imposed on the wealthy. And finally, a slide on the general feeling about capitalism and support for capitalism. The statement was that the economic system should be completely reshaped because capitalism is incapable of improving the situation of the poor. As you can see, 30% agreed, 20% strongly agreed with this statement, while 10% disagreed and only 4% strongly disagreed. So from this data and from any other data that I've seen in the last decade, we could say that that even if the case is not that the Hungarian population is strongly anti-capitalist, there isn't a strong support for capitalism either. There is some criticism when it comes to capitalism, and I believe experts would be more qualified to talk about why maybe the Hungarian population thinks this way, but I feel that the heritage of the socialist era in Hungary resulted in a big belief in state intervention, and the vast majority of the Hungarian population is in favor of state intervention. They want a big state when it comes to economics, and they want the state to redistribute resources. Whether it's the good or bad way to go forward, I will leave to our experts. First, before I ask you to come out, we'll hear a quick video presentation of our Austrian partner, who unfortunately couldn't join us, but was kind enough to record a short video message. So please listen to that video, and then we'll proceed with the panel discussion here. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry that I could not attend today's conference in person, but unfortunately my schedule didn't allow for it this week because I very recently switched positions and joined NEOS, our party, as a political director, and could thus not come to Budapest today. But thanks so much for Republikon, not only for organizing this conference, but also to let me participate, at least in this virtual fashion. I will try to contribute something on my behalf with my view and of course my background that I'm bringing in here. Just as a very brief introduction, I've worked as an economist and as an economic journalist in the past in Austria and for a Swiss media company. So I will provide, of course, a lens through which to look at the question of this conference that is looking at very specific metrics and data and economic analysis. And we all know that we can look at the scope and the size of government intervention through also different lenses than I will be providing today. I want to provide actually two key points for the discussion. First, looking at the argument in principle, what can we and what should we expect from a government during a crisis? And secondly, I would like to look at reasons for growing government interventions during the pandemic and the energy crisis. And there are good reasons and good intentions, like helping SMEs, helping labor markets adapt to changes and new environments. There are bad reasons, missing preparation, and very populist measures to deal with a decline in trust in government or parties. And there have been the ugly reasons for growing intervention, like the chaos that ran before it, or corruption during these crises. So, as always, there are good, bad, and ugly reasons why government interventions have grown over the recent months and years. I would like to start with the topic and the question of the conference, the state's role during current crises. Now, what can we expect, or should we expect, the citizens as experts from a government in a crisis such as the pandemic or the energy crisis of the last couple of years? I would say it's rather three very basic principles, very basic things that government can provide. The first thing is preparation, right? Going into any crisis, we should have learned lessons from the past in what ways a government agency might be able to alleviate the repercussions of a crisis, of a pandemic, for instance. And this is true for a health emergency as well as for any other issue. So in most cases, many of the agencies that work today as government entities actually exist because of one major crisis or a series of major crises in the past. So one very recent example would be, for instance, the European Systemic Risk Board, the ESRB, which was founded after the financial crisis of 2008-2009 and now aims to prevent systemic risks from growing and emerging to levels that are deemed as unsustainable. Secondly, of course, there's crisis management. So we do expect our governments and its political representatives to follow some basic rules of crisis management, right? For instance, when it comes to gathering information, communicating these informations, and providing resources where needed when we see problems, when we see needs to intervene in markets or intervene in a health crisis. And thirdly, we would expect political leadership in any crisis. So trust in government and trust in institutions are a consequence of actions taken, measures communicated, and help provided. So very often, the trust in an institution is not the same as the trust in a particular person, a particular politician. And we saw that there were countries like Sweden where experts were the ones communicating measures, and there were countries like Austria and Germany where politicians were the ones to communicate those. Now, a modern state, a modern government can, of course, fulfill many of those basic functions with very swift communication, very smart technology, and very efficient learning techniques, looking at what other countries are doing in the same time, but we'll get back to that at the end, of course. Now, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but I would still say that many governments in Europe have actually mismanaged some or many of the aspects during the pandemic. This is, on the one hand, very obvious, because we see that trust has eroded quite significantly across many European economies, with suffering only minor declines in some of the Scandinavian ones, like Denmark, but suffering major declines in countries like Austria and Germany when it comes to how the government is perceived, how government is trusted. And we have, of course, countries in Central and Eastern Europe which traditionally have already started at a lower trust level, and where this pandemic also provided reason to be skeptical about whether the government knows what it's doing in terms of crisis intervention. But apart from trust, there was something else actually on a clear upward trajectory recently, and that was the cost associated with these crises, with this polycrisis. In a very recent study based on European Commission data, we at NEOS Lab, the foundation of NEOS, we did a thorough comparison of EU governments during the health and energy crisis in terms of what they actually spent in terms of government spending, government aid. What we found was actually a very enormous gap in fiscal costs between various governments, various countries. And governments in Europe averaged many thousand euros per capita in terms of government aid, subsidies, etc. But the range was actually between 1,000 euros per capita in the case of Estonia, and going all the way up to 7,000 euros per capita over the time frame of 2020 to 2022 in the case of Austria or Luxembourg. In terms of cost in percent of GDP, so gross domestic product, the overall economy, the range was actually 2.5% for Estonia and 16.4% in Greece when we just look at the crisis investment or the crisis costs of the pandemic. This is, of course, over many years as a percentage point of 1 year's GDP. So looking at the energy crisis, the cost for subsidies and price measures, for instance, since last year in February, add up to only 0.5% of GDP in Denmark and close to 7.5% of GDP in Germany, the announced measures, of course. So we can really state that not all government interventions are created equally in Europe, and especially this is very true for the last 3 years. From a liberal perspective, we could argue that there are a number of issues of importance to look at the efficiency of government interventions. So I would actually raise 4 issues here. The first is, were the government interventions actually successful in dealing with the real problem? So in terms of the health crisis, were they successful in reducing the human cost of the health crisis when we were fighting against the outcomes of the pandemic? Secondly, have they been able to allow for adoption and adaptation on our level as companies, as citizens, when it came to dealing with the challenges and the crises? Or were they just focusing on kind of conserving the current structure? I would like to raise a point here from the energy crisis. If government subsidies are mostly used to subsidize current energy consumption and prop up demand for instance, gas and oil, companies might be lured into technologies that prove to be expensive a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and are actually locked in technologies that might not make a lot of sense at the taxpayer's expense, which makes no sense at all. Thirdly, do we need to fund government programs and measures because of risky behavior or wrong decisions in the past, or just due to the systemic crisis that we see? So in the pandemic, for instance, subsidies in dealing with the outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic were particularly high, for instance, in countries like Austria and Germany, but not only because those countries were hit harder by the pandemic, but rather because we had very long and far-reaching lockdowns over a prolonged period of time. So the economic damage created by the pandemic was exacerbated by government interventions in the first place. And that led, of course, to high and growing costs in industries like hotels and services. And finally, are we actually providing targeted support for those who need it, or are we actually overspending scarce government resources during a crisis? And we have to be honest, many governments, actually too many governments, have ignored many of those questions. And we see that responses to the recent crisis can be clustered as good, bad, or outright ugly. So I would argue that the good reactions to these crises of the past years were actually where governments managed to help those who are really in need. Look, for instance, in the corporate sector, more at the SMEs who might not be able to deal on their own with challenges that are facing them, and, for instance, make labor markets more flexible to adapt to measures or make measures more temporary in nature. So one of the very well-functioning interventions, in my view, would be the Kurzarbeit, short-term work schemes, where governments stepped in, allowed employees to be still attached to their employers over a short period of time, even though their cost was briefly borne by taxpayers, as they might be at home due to lockdowns, due to quarantines, or due to sickness. So managing to briefly adapt and briefly conserve a system like a labor market, but allow it to react over the medium term very swiftly to the challenges with, for instance, stay-at-home schemes, flexible work, digital and teleworking. I think you have to really balance those things out on a very well thought through. Then there have been the bad interventions. So, for instance, missing preparations and providing, after some time, very costly populist measures. Especially in the pandemic, this happened very recently and in many countries. So we saw before that there was a very broad spread in terms of economic costs from 1,000 to 7,000 euros per capita. Austria and Germany, for instance, did not manage at all to really have a good and thought out data collection and measures on a national level, but rather we had measures on a state or even community level, meaning that at all times there was a wild array of different complex measures in place, how to deal with the pandemic, how workplaces are affected, how hotels are affected, how venues are affected. And during the energy crisis, we also had massive economic stimulus in some countries that has further increased the observed inflation rates and thus worsening the problems that politicians claim to reduce. So the bad interventions were really those that actually exacerbated the problems underneath the headline numbers. So a government stepping in to prop up demand for scarce energy goods in a time of scarcity in energy goods is actually counterproductive and increasing inflation rates, while, for instance, the European central banks or other central banks might be working very hard to reduce inflation rates. And then there were really some ugly interventions, chaotic ones or corrupt ones. Both in the pandemic and the energy crisis, responses were often not well structured, meaning that governments, for instance, at the beginning of the pandemic, were bidding against each other for masks, for health equipment, propping up prices even further, and really also introducing more stress to the system of European solidarity. This happened, for instance, between Germany, Austria, and Italy. It also happened on our borders to Hungary and Slovakia, where we, of course, had the problem and the issue of people traveling between countries to go to work with very different work environments during the health crisis. And people adapted to those challenges very often by stop commuting and looking for work in their national markets, thus also propping up barriers between countries during the pandemic. But we also had chaotic and corrupt responses to the energy crisis. For instance, energy sources during the acute times of crisis were seen as opportunities by some politically very well-connected companies or individuals, and lobbying and corruption also played a very major role in not only in response to the crisis, but also in preparation. For instance, the Austrian government or the Hungarian government are very close to lobbyists and providers of energy like Gazprom from the Russian state gas company, and thus were much slower to adapt to the challenges of the European gas market than, for instance, other countries that have reduced the reliance on Russian gas already before 2022. So there is also a lot of lobbying and maybe outright corruption involved when we see former heads of government or former finance ministers in governments lobbying on behalf of an energy provider or energy company during an energy crisis, of course. All in all, I would say, coming back to the topic, that we need to keep in mind that there is a very basic expectations that we have regarding our governments and a state, how to deal with a crisis, and that is that government should not try or should try very hard not to worsening the situation by its action and by using our taxpayer euros. So it is really a worst case scenario that many countries actually increased inflation by all their interventions, by capping prices, by propping up demand, and that is something that we have to keep an eye out as liberals going forward, that this does not happen again. Furthermore, we need to keep learning from efficient and smart responses to any challenge that comes our way. So we actually need to learn quicker from the sometimes 26 responses in Europe to a shock from the external sphere, and see an intervention in Denmark or Sweden might be very well constructed. Maybe we try that also on our turf, because our institutions, our responses, and our levels of government that are dealing with these challenges are very differently structured in Europe still. And on a European level, we might thus be not only experimenting at any time with at least a dozen different approaches and institutional arrangements, but we can thus, of course, learn much quicker today and measure how different approaches to things have actually worked out. And we need to connect those measures, we need to connect those responses and the databases behind them to better improve the state's role in coming crisis and to learn more from how we deal with challenges ahead.
Jó napot kívánok! Welcome! Elkezdenénk a beszélgetést, és majd akkor angolul bemutatnék mindenkit, és köszönjük szépen a személyes megjelenést mindenkinek. Welcome everybody. I would like to introduce our first panel discussion. We have Éva Palócz, who is the CEO of the Hungarian research company Kopint-Tárki, and we have Fanta, who is chief analyst of CETA, a Czech research institute.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. It's always good to be back in Budapest.
So we had already so much information that people think about the role of state, what we could see in Europe, especially with the energy and COVID crisis. Firstly, maybe it would be interesting to talk about that, how the role of states have changed over a longer term. So when we look at data in the developed countries, we could see that actually the state spending was growing, but in Europe not really much changed. We had the COVID crisis, then it was a bit more spending, and it's interesting, is it going back to normal levels, or will it stay a bit higher than before?
May I start it? Please, ábrákat fel lehet tenni? I have brought some charts to demonstrate the different, the structure of expenditure of the state in different countries, in these 4 countries, because I expected 4 participants in this panel, Czechia, Austria, Italy, and Hungary. What is the level of the state public expenditure in % of the GDP, and how it changed in a couple of decades. And what we can see is that after the Second World War, the welfare state was created and established, and the state expenditure, public expenditure, rose from 25%. So after the Second World War, it was only 25% in the average of the European Union, the rate of state public expenditure, and it rose to over 50% in the 90s. And I think that this is the limit of state expenditures in % of GDP. That is the chart in the first upper line left, and in the last 20 years, it fluctuated around 50%. Although during the crisis, it rose very substantially. However, my forecast is that it will go back to this 50% within some years, especially because the expenditure, so rate of expenditure has a natural limit, because we shouldn't forget that this expenditure has to be funded by taxes, by the revenues of the state. So every penny what is spent by the state, in our case, is half of the GDP. That's a very substantial part, substantial share of the economy. Every penny, which is every fillet or every
Cents. Euro cents.
I wanted to say that corona. No. Every corona, but it's a small money. Yeah. Every corona which is spent by the state is collected somehow from the participants from the actors of the economy, the companies or the families, the households, and if you raise the taxes, these actors of the economy will have less money for consumption, less money for investment. That means that it diminish the level of GDP and diminish the rate of growth of the economy. So that is why, and next year, in 24, the Maastricht criteria will be reintroduced by the European Union. So that is that the limit of the public deficit will be reintroduced at 3% of GDP, and also the debt rules will be maybe a little bit changing, but will be used again, and that will be a situation what the countries have to adjust them. That is why I think that is this 50% is the upper limit of state expenditure, state intervention.
Yeah, we can see the rise of the expensive during the COVID crisis and the energy crisis. That was the same in the Czech Republic. Our deficit, from the last year or this year, is like 6% of the GDP, and it used to be much less. And we could see that the biggest expenses was in the countries like Germany or Austria, because they could afford it, because they had big budget surpluses during the years from 2017 to 2019. So they had money that they could use. But all the other countries had to loan that money so they can save the households and the business sector. And the gross debt compared to the GDP rose from 30% to 43%. So it's like a very huge increase. And the Czech Republic, they know about it. And as you said, there is a limit for the government spending, around 50%. And if we want to spend so much money, we need to raise taxes or get more money for the government. And our government in the Czech Republic realized that this is a thing, and there is they call it economic saving package, which, let's say, a little bit raising taxes for everyone, but not because they want to spend so much money in the long term, but because they need to get the government budget in the balance. So they took a strategy to get a little bit of money from everyone. So everyone is a little bit pissed, like households, business sector, and also the government. And this is the only way how to get the budget in the balance, because everything which is government spending is the loan for all of us.
But maybe a new thing about this crisis, that before, in the 2008-2009 financial crisis, states tried to save the banks, but not just giving money to everybody in the economy. In Europe, in US, we had what we can see in the second chart on the top, that actually the government expenditure on the economic affairs just skyrocketed. This is really interesting because the main idea was that this will keep the economy going, that we give cash to companies, but it was not working out that well, as we can see on the GDP figures in Europe. So what do you think about that? Was it a good idea to take this step, that the states spent direct funding for companies, cash payments for them, or it was not that smart, and should we do in further crisis something similar?
I think it was necessary to use those or to provide help to those who really need it, like to households who need it and the businesses who need it, when we all agreed on it. But the thing was that we didn't have the tools to aim the help to those who actually need it. So we were just like giving money to everyone. And this is one of the reasons of the high inflation rate right now. So we needed tools how to help those who are in need. And this is one of the area where the states should intervene. It's the digitization. Everyone can like imagine something different under the term of digitization. There are like, for me, there are two levels of that. The first one is like to communicate with the government through online system and so on. But the second level is the open data. And then when I say open data, a lot of people like imagine like that there is some kind of a database that the ministry is giving to the wide audience that they could work with their data. But the true purpose of the open data is that the ministries can share the data with each other. For example, in the Czech Republic, if there is someone who wants to like a full form for some kind of a social help, they need to go to the labor office and they need to write on the paper how much money they were earning during the last 3 months. But this is the information which the Ministry of Finance already have, right? But there are no tools how those governments can share the data with each other. And you really need that because this is the only way how to aim the help on those businesses and households who really need it. So we know that the help is crucial during the crisis. But we need to be very crucial about who we are helping because not all the households and not all the companies really needed it.
Turning back to the economic function of the state, so the state involvement in the economy, which is shown on the second chart. I forgot to tell you that this one, please keep it. That Hungary is on every chart is shown with a red line with yellow triangle. I say it for those who are far behind to understand better the charts. So to turn back to the economic function of the state, in Hungary, this function, so the spending of the state on economic purposes, rose very substantially in recent years, and that is a new ideology of the state. We have an interventionist state, not only in economy but also on other field of the country, but also in the economy. It is difficult to decide what is the origin of this strong intervention. One might think that corruption is one important factor. For example, what you said, non-refundable capital, which is given to certain actors of the economy, for example, for touristic purposes, that is not beneficial for the economy, and it really distorts the competition. In Europe, the state aid was prohibited many years ago, many decades actually. It is loosening now a little bit, but many decades it was prohibited because it distorts the competition. So actors of the economy will be in unbeneficial or in a worse position who who do not get this money against those who are the beneficiary of this free money, actually. So, but the other, I thought that there might be different reasons for this interventionist state. The other that I think that this government really thinks that centralization and decision made by the center is a better way of functioning or operating the economy.
This is a good thing to look at. So these corruption cases, so from a lot of countries, we heard about Austria is also really high corruption related to the...
The level is not the same, I think.
Oh,
so
it's very similar.
We cannot compare the size of
European data shows that actually in public procurement, Austria is similar on level like Hungary. But like, the main question is it just that states are spending more on direct support for companies? Is it leading to more corruption risk? Or this is just in every country you have a corruption level and it will not change from that if you just spend more?
Well, I believe more money means more corruption. That's why we need to cut the subsidies. That's my opinion. Because the subsidy or more government money isn't the key for the economic growth, which we all countries need right now to balance the government's debt and to, like, we need to find a new engine for the government growth after those crises. And more government spending is really not the way how to get on a pace of the economic growth again. And the idea of intervention is not bad at the beginning, but the question is, what's the goal of such intervention? And the role of the government, from my point of view, should be like to support the business, but not financially, like to give money to them and give money to them and give subsidy there, and not them, but they're more. But it's more about the business climate. It's more about like helping companies with the research and development, but not like giving them money to do the research, but like to incentivize them through some kind of a possibilities of the tax deductions and so on. So there are many tools how the government should intervene, but the money is not the way, I believe.
Yes, I agree how you said it, more spending, more corruption. I would formulate a little bit different, more free money, the more corruption. So it concerns really to the economic, so free money to economic actors, and I think that the level of corruption is not the same, not only based on the rate of spending, on the amount of spending. There are other elements, other factors like cultural, traditional, and other elements which defines the rate of corruption and the level of corruption. And in Hungary, we are not very good in this list.
Yeah, definitely. The corruption is affected by many other things than the free money. It's about the culture, about the history, and about many other things. Like we, the post-Soviet countries, I think we are more sensible to corruptions because the communist systems like damaged us a bit. Than the part of the Western part, when the Western Europe, there I think we are more like vulnerable to those corruption acts due to communist era and due to our just culture.
Or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, yeah. So if you go back more. But on the other hand, what can be learned from this situation that we had? That actually it was also mentioned in Lukas' video message that actually in Europe, every country had a really different approach. So from Estonia to Luxembourg, like tenfold difference from the per capita spending. So if it would have been more European way centralized on the European level, these measures, could we have more efficient outcome, so also less inflation and higher GDP growth maybe? So because some governments were actually funding against each other. If you think about so different industries getting different type of incentives in different countries, so they were competing with each other in a lot of fields. So is there a opportunity for the future to organize it better?
I do not think that these things can be standardized or centralized. That is the issue of each individual country. But I think that the chart we saw at the Lukas presentation, I guess that that was mainly not economic but mainly social aid. The social aid cannot be centralized. As I told you before, that is different in different countries based on different history and state ideology. In Hungary, we have the work-based economy or work-based economy. Is it munka-alapú társadalom? Word-based society. Sometimes it's said guest work-based economy. So the Hungarian government doesn't take care too much on social issues. That we can see on the last chart. The government expenditure on social protection decreased since 2010 every year, and now it is comparable to the Czech situation, but it was different 10 years ago or 12 years ago. So the neglecting of social issues is a definite characteristic of this economic and social policy in Hungary. So I do not think that this question could be handled the same in Hungary and in Denmark, or in Hungary and in Sweden. That is quite different countries from this point of view.
Yeah, the situation is different country by country, definitely. But I believe there are some things which could be the same, or the solutions which could be similar for all of those countries. We can have tools like how to aim the social help to those who really need it. We can have tools to that. We don't need to invite something new. We just can use what Germany did or something like that. So we can have tools how to aim on those companies or households who really need the help. So this is, I think, one of the common things. And like there are no tools because the situation is different country by country, as I mentioned. And if the European Union could say, okay, close the restaurants because during the COVID, because there is a big risk of the infection, and I think closing the restaurants could be the solution from one country, but it couldn't be the solution from another country. Like in the Czech Republic, we had like the time period where the restaurants were closed, were one of the longest in the European Union. And despite that, we lost the fight against the COVID, and we ended up among the countries with the highest number of the deaths due to the COVID. And that leads me to another thing, which we need some kind of a common strategy within the Europe, and it's the fight against misinformation. And as was already said during the presentation, in Sweden, only the scientists and professors were talking to people about the risk of the COVID and so on. And that's something which we need to improve, all of us, to communicate with the people and fight the misinformation. So this could be the common strategy for the whole European Union in the future.
There are lots of social aspects that we can talk about. So maybe one economic type of question, that all the European countries are pretty stressed on the debt level, so this kind of spending cannot go on in the future. So what do you think, what opportunities there are for another type of cooperation with private sector from the government? So is there maybe an opportunity to outsource some of the state's functions to private companies or investors, or are there other type of cooperation possibilities that can help to lower the spending level of governments?
Well, what's happening in the Czech Republic right now is that we have like two biggest business associations who are like always competing with each other, but now they cooperating on preparing a strategy. But Czech Republic is the world champion of making strategies which ended up somewhere in the shelter. But this strategy like aiming on the long strategic goals. And I think this is the way how the government could help to the whole economy, like to define those long-term strategic goals, which will lead to the economic growth in the future. And like fulfilling those goals is much longer than 4 years. This is just the political cycle. It could be like 10 years from now. And there are several things like which we can include among those strategic goals, which is like the infrastructure, like the transport or high-speed infrastructure. Like, I mean the trains. If you want to go by train from Vienna to Berlin, it goes not through the Czech Republic. It's just to go across the Czech Republic because we do not have trains for that. And this is a thing where the business sector couldn't act alone. He needs the government's help. And there are much more other areas where the government can help, but not with like pumping the money in the area, but like cultivating the business environment and helping the business to do as they can do. Another thing is research, development, and education. Like government can help to connect the universities and high schools with the business, and maybe incentivize the schools. That if there are schools who are like very, very good at communicating and cooperation with the business sector, they can get more money for that or so on. So there are a lot of things where the state should intervene to help the whole economic situation in the long term. But again, not by just pumping the money to everyone, but setting up long strategic goals, find some kind of a common solution with the business, how to help them, but not with the money, but how to improve the business environment to help them grow in the future. That's from my point of view.
Yeah, theoretically, the public sector and the public and private sector cooperation might be very, very useful in implementing certain projects. We have seen good examples and bad examples as well. Some years ago, 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, we participated, the Kopint-Tárki Institute participated in an international research consortium, research project that was exactly about the cooperation of public-private partnership in services. That was the title. And we were there from different countries, 7 or 8 participants from 7 or 8 countries. And that was interesting that, for example, the Danish colleague told me that it is very interesting that the Eastern European colleagues are very suspicious towards the state. So they think that by this cooperation, the private-public partnership brings only corruption, fraud, and other things. A Danish citizen saying that where the state has a very strong
belief in the
truth. So, trust. Strong trust with the state, and thinks that where the public sector is there, that must be a fair business. Where the private sector is always a little bit suspicious. They might cheat because they want to have higher profit or so, because they are profit oriented. But where the state is, that is a fair business. And so there's a big difference between Western, especially Northern, Scandinavian approach to the state, approach to the partnership between the public and private sector, and the Eastern European, or maybe Southern European, I do not know.
So maybe just a remark that you mentioned that a lot of strategy end up not just in the trash bin. So there's another way, not even having strategies. So that's maybe worse. And with the high-speed train, so in Hungary we have to cancel train tracks. So it is always like, different levels. But from the social aspect, this COVID crisis showed that we have to spend more on health in some special situation, but generally the spending on health will be a problem in Europe because of aging population and the rising cost of new innovative technologies. So there will be a lot available on the market from the private sector, but it will cost much more. That simply, if you look at the chart, that health spending is pretty much stable, what used to be stable in Europe. So is there a way how to treat this situation that obviously there is never enough money on health, but how to be better on that? So market approach could be implemented, or simply we just have to accept the fact that we have to spend more on health.
Yeah, what the Czech government did right now, that they raised the let's say health insurance for employees. So that's one way how to get more money to the healthcare system. But there are more ways, I believe. Just only, I think, 1 or 2% of the overall expenditure on the healthcare system goes into the prevention. Like in the Czech Republic, every employee have a right, which is paid by the health insurance company, to go to see your doctor to get some regular check every 2 years, and only 40% of the Czech population do that. But if everyone does that, like the doctor could see that there is something wrong with you, and they could just start the medicine and curing the procedure at the right time. And if you're getting the medicine at the right time, not after the situation gets worse, it costs the system much less money and so on. Another thing is harm reduction approach, for example, in the area of tobacco regulation, which is closely connected to the healthcare system. Like there are a lot of people who smoke regularly, and we have alternatives to smoking, like to traditional cigarettes. We have like nicotine pouches and the e-cigarettes and so on. And these products are much less, let's say, risky to your health. So we need somehow to incentivize the smokers to shift from regular cigarettes to those products which are less risky, like the nicotine pouches. And one of the way how to do it is lower the consumption tax on those low risky products compared to the traditional cigarettes. We need to make cigarettes much more expensive than the nicotine pouches. And that's the same. That could be the same in many other areas. And debate in the Czech Republic was also about some kind of a bonuses and maluses for people on the health insurance regarding how they live. Like if they are obese, or if they are smoking, or if they are drinking too much, they should pay more for the health insurance. It's hard to implement, but the debate is all right, I think.
We can see on the chart expenditure on health chart. In Hungary, the healthcare sector is strongly underfinanced. So we can see on the chart there are only 4 countries, but if we compare the spending on healthcare in Hungary with the other European countries, with each European country, then we can see that Hungary is among the worst, among the lowest spending on the healthcare. Not only lower than this country, but also than most majority of the countries. That means the actual spending on healthcare is not that is only the public spending. We private citizens spend these 2.5 points in GDP from our own pocket, from our own money, and that is not a fair system, I think, because only rich people or high-income people, or at least middle-income people, who can allow themselves to use the private healthcare system. And what is very, very worrying, that this tendency is continuing. Also this year, for example, in the GDP, that the consumption of the households, that was a very substantial part in very substantial role that the GDP didn't fall much more, that the consumption of healthcare services of the household, private services, grew. Meanwhile, the retail trade turnover went down because health is very, very important, maybe much important than eating. I do not think, but the fact is that the health system in Hungary, the health policy in Hungary is continuously pushing the services into the direction of the private healthcare system. And I don't know what will be the end of this process. What share between private and public services will be created within 10 years, let's say.
Yeah, but this is not only a Hungarian phenomenon. Everywhere, the private spending on healthcare is growing much faster than the state spending. And this is an interesting question. We can see the US, where it's mostly financed from private, the healthcare system. It has really bad outcomes. So they spend the highest amount compared to GDP, 15 to 20% around the healthcare, and the outcome is not that good on the total, and the distribution is even more ugly. So this is a really interesting question, that when we see that there is like a need for more spending, for instance, on health, is it better that the states say that we cannot do anything else, we have to raise this spending on health, or should we leave it to the market, that people get some lower level, and then the market will find itself the demand from the people?
Okay, you mentioned the American system that is completely different, so we cannot compare the American system with the European at all. That is it is really based on individual financing and this insurance system. As far as I know, there is a continuous fight between the private citizens and the insurance companies, what should be financed by the company and what shouldn't. So that it is the other system. But in Hungary, what is important, we pay the insurance tax, and at the same time, we are paying the price of the private healthcare.
Yeah, but the state is not spending less than people spend paid by the social insurance levies.
But the state spends much less than in other countries. The two percentage points. These 2 percentage points is missing. That is how much? More than 1,000 billion forints.
2 billion euros.
It is missing, yeah. If you compare with other countries.
Yeah, I believe in America there's a totally different culture, and they also have very high government spending, around 50% of the GDP, but most of that goes to the army. And but the problem within the European countries or within the European societies is that everyone wants more from the state, as was already mentioned in the questionnaire survey. And but the problem is that the economist said that not in my backyard effect, which is like everyone agree on that we need highways, but no one wants the highway on his backyard behind his house, right? And it's the same with the government spending, with the welfare, and with the healthcare system. Everyone agrees that we want more from the state, but nobody wants to pay that from their pocket, like from their money. So that's the question: how to raise the money for that. But it's not about switch the healthcare system from the public to private. But I think we can make some small steps at the beginning, like every patient, when he comes to the doctor, could pay a small fee, which could be like €5 to €10, something really little, just to consider whether his circumstances are so bad that he really needs to go to see the doctor, like to make the decision. Is it really needed to see the doctor? If I go there, I will pay €5 for every visit, and it seems like a really small amount of money, but if every visit is like worth €5, it will be a huge amount of money for the healthcare system.
Maybe go back to these charts. These charts are made from the so-called SCOFOG statistics. That is the classification of functions of government. It consists of 10 functions. These 6 are only the major functions. The defense of public order is not so important, and I think that this chart that we have to compare the different charts, and we see what are the preferences of the state. I think that there's an excellent statistics, and this is the best when we want to analyze the preferences, the priorities of the state. What is the priorities and the preferences of the Hungarian state today? The healthcare is not. We have seen the 2% lower spending on healthcare than in the average, and also in the Czech Republic. But these 2 percentage points is there at the sports, recreation, religion, and culture. We know exactly where is the money go to stadiums, and not only to stadiums and sports clubs, what we could think, but also to culture. So we have to finance these historical films, a little bit falsifying the glorious Hungarian.
It's not in that. That's not directly financed. It's from tax incentives, and this is not part of the state spending.
No, it is. We should note that these charts show only the spending, the expenditure of the state, and do not show the tax allowances. What is, how to say, the loss of revenues. That is important also at social protection. So the social protection expenditure are not so low actually. The expenditure are so low, but it doesn't include the family allowance, tax allowance, what the family gets after children, tax-based deduction. Also that is the case at sports, because it doesn't include the transfers of companies to the sports clubs, mainly the football clubs. About 20% of the profit tax, instead of paying it into the state budget, transferring this money to the sports clubs. But anyhow, I think that the Hungarian expenditure level or rate of expenditure is not very different from other countries. The structure of spending is different. The healthcare is not important for the government or the economic policy. Sports and economy, free money, distributing free money to certain entrepreneurs, being very close to the government, or if I formulate very polite. So that is the structure of priorities of the economic and social policy, of the present economic and social policy.
About lost revenues, it's also important to touch upon the role of global digital enterprises. There's a lot of talk about Google, Facebook, but the whole digital economy is built up that they don't really pay taxes in smaller countries. What is the limitation for government's roles in that? So even getting data from citizens from these companies is really hard, but also getting the tax revenues from digital economy is very complicated. How do you see how important is this? How big risk is that? How can we go on with that in the future?
I think we need a solution for that on the international level, which I believe on the European level or on the state level or on the world level, I would say. But because I think that OECD is dealing with this, right? Because they are suggesting those 2 pillars, but the second pillar is setting like something like a minimal corporate income tax, and the first pillar deals with those countries who operates all around the world, but have the headquarters only in one country. So this is like a big issue, but I'm not really sure about the right solution, but what I'm sure about, we need one solution for every country, because if every country in the world have different solution, it will be messed for those companies to get the business in there.
Yes, I agree. That's a global problem which can be solved only globally. As far as I know, concerning transparency, what you mentioned, since 2 years, since 2021, the multinational companies have to declare what taxes, how much taxes they paid in different countries. So you can follow where the production or the activity of the company was carried out, implemented, and where they paid the taxes. Fortunately, Hungary, as far as I know, Hungary already voted for this global minimum tax regulation, which might be introduced next year, as far as I know. No?
But to be honest, that pillar only touches upon really small number of companies, and actually Hungary is also obliging the minimal tax level, so we are also doing it. But that doesn't mean that these companies would pay taxes. They just give data to OECD, which is anonymized, and you cannot follow which company. So you never know Google pays any taxes in Hungary or not. And compare it to a local company, which has to pay high taxes. This is really a big issue, that the most profitable companies in the world are not paying taxes.
Yeah, it might be. It was not quite clear. It was clear from one point of view, but from global point of view, that Hungary voted so long against this minimum tax regulation, because actually, based on the calculation, including this business tax, IPA, including
local
this business local business tax, actually, which is 1 or 2%, the under 2% paid to the local municipalities, and calculated not on the basis of the profit, but on the turnover. So according to this calculation, the Hungarian tax level more or less reached this 15%, under or above this 15, but basically there would have been not a big change in the taxation of these companies. But the communication of this regulation is different. So the communication globally is that we have to regulate multinational companies, which really, through tax optimization, let's say so, allocate the tax obligation where the tax rate is very low, and that is very beneficial for some countries, for some others, the opposite. But from this communication point of view, the Hungarian government can say that we are fighting against the multinational company. We are protecting the Hungarian interests and so on.
Well, I don't think it's about that those companies do not pay any taxes. They actually pay taxes, but only in the country where they have their headquarters, right? So the question is how to redistribute.
Well, they are basically based in Ireland with the IPs, which they bring to Bermuda. So at the end of the day, they pay negligible taxes compared to normal businesses.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the question is how to redistribute the tax to the regions where the business is actually going, right? And this is a really hard question, and I think the solution should be with the cooperation of those companies, because if any like additional administrative burden for those companies or any additional tax will be, in the end of the day, will be paid by the customers. So we need to find the right solution for those companies to like get some kind of a suitable conditions, how to pay the taxes and how to get the business done. Because as I said, any additional administrative cost or tax for those companies will be shifted to the consumers at the end. So we are not talking about taxing the companies, but the cost will be paid by us at the end of the day. So we need to be really careful about that.
We have max 10 minutes left, so I would like to And does anybody have any question to our panelists? Because then.
Igen, megismétlem akkor most. Tehát először egy nagyon rövid véleményt szeretnék mondani. Először is javasolnám a Republikonnak, hogy az egészségügyről csináljon egy külön konferenciát. Tegnap módon volt Balatonalmádiba meghallgatni a belügyminisztériumhoz tartozó egészségügyi államtitkárt, és teljesen más álláspontot képviselt, mint amit az Éva elmondott. Ugyanakkor a jelenlévők többsége meg azt az álláspontot képviselte, amit az Éva mondott. Mihálytől, vagy Misály, nem tudom, hogy kell mondani, azt szeretném kérdezni, hogy a Covid-dal való vélemény, ez az ön álláspontja, vagy pedig a cseh kormánynak a véleménye, hogy nem voltak toppon a Covid elleni védekezésben. És azt nem értettem, hogy ön Svédországot mondta mintának. Hát Svédországban jóformán lehet, hogy a tudósok mondták a Covid-dal, hogy mit kell tenni, de szinte semmi védekezés nem volt. Köszönöm.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The point of view is representing like the opinion of the Czech Economic National Council, because our board, our chief executive director is the member of such council, and they are advising the Czech government what kind of economic interventions should be done. But the Sweden thing, it was more about not the government, not the healthcare spending. It was about how the Sweden communicated with the society during the COVID crisis. Because in the Czech Republic, the communication was like, there was a press conference when there was a prime minister with all the other members of the council, and they were like telling people what are the new regulations, what are the new risks, what is the situation about the COVID. And the trust in government like decreased during the COVID crisis from 60% to 30%. Like nobody believed the government because they were saying like very chaotic things and so on. But the persons who were communicating with the society in the Sweden were actually the experts from the healthcare system who really like know the problematics, and they were like able to explain those really hard things to the society in a way that they were able to understand it. So the Sweden example was about the communicating during the crisis, but as I mentioned, the reforms according to the healthcare system, which I was suggested, this is a kind which is these are ideas which are part of the discussion in the Czech Republic right now, because the Czech government is like they know that there is a gap in financing the healthcare system, but the only thing they did is like they raised the social the payment which needs to be paid by the employee for his health insurance. So this is the only thing they did, but I believe there are many other ways how to help the healthcare system. And if we do that, I don't believe we will see the exams or the results the next year, but we will see them in the next 3 or 5 years. I mean the prevention. Like we need like to get the people for those preventive checks, because if we diagnose the diseases at the right time, the cost of like curing the disease is much lower than if the disease is diagnosed like late. So there are a lot of ways how to help the healthcare system, not just by pumping the money in it, but some kind of changes which like change the behavior of the people, how to behave more like in the sense of to like save some money for the healthcare system.
If there is no other question, then let's have them minute break, and then we continue with the next panel. I would like to thank Michael and Éva. And also, after the next discussion, we will have some sandwiches, so it's worth to stay for the conversation. Thanks a lot.